Something happened in China in 2025 that caught the whole world off guard. A factory there started mass-producing a brand new kind of battery. Here's the strange part. This battery doesn't use lithium at all. The main ingredient T inside it is something so ordinary you probably have a box of it in your kitchen right now, costing around $1, a pound at the store. And yet that plain, everyday material is powering a battery that doesn't catch fire, keeps working in bitter cold, and can last close to 30 years of daily charging. The company behind it just landed the largest battery order anyone has ever recorded to 60 gigawatt-hours of capacity. To put that in perspective, that single deal is close to half of everything that company produced across every battery type it sells in all of 2025. Meanwhile, American battery companies spent 3 decades betting everything on lithium. They had every opportunity to explore this other path. They passed on it, called it a side project rather than a real technology. And now they're watching the ground shift beneath them in a matter of months, without having seen it coming. This is the story of how China found a way around lithium while America was looking the other way. The ingredient was hiding in plain sight the whole time, and the company that pulled it off is one most Americans have never heard of. But before we get to that company and that enormous deal, you need to understand why lithium ruled the battery world for so long, and why almost nobody thought anything could replace it. Rewind to the early 1990s. Phones were the size of bricks. Laptops weighed as much as a bowling ball, and a video camera battery might give you an hour if you were lucky. A phone that fit in your pocket and lasted. All day sounded like science fiction. Nobody could pack enough energy into a small enough space without making the battery too heavy to be useful. Then, in 1991, Sony released the first commercially available lithium-ion battery. The energy packed into every pound of battery roughly tripled almost overnight. Suddenly, devices shrank. Phones got smarter. Electric cars started looking like a real possibility instead of a fantasy. The wireless earbuds people wear today, the thin laptops on every coffee shop table, the electric cars in driveways across the country, the power tools in garages everywhere, all of it traces back to what Sony did that year. Why did lithium work so well? 2 reasons, really. First, lithium atoms are extremely light, so you can pack millions of them into a small space without adding much weight. Exactly what you need inside a phone or a car. Second, lithium pushes a strong electrical current. Each atom moves more power through a circuit than almost any other element can manage. Light and powerful, the perfect recipe for a battery. For 30 years, the whole world chased lithium. Billions of dollars went into mining it out of the ground in places like Australia and Chile. Factories scaled up. Prices fell year after year. Electric cars went farther with each new model. It looked like lithium had answered every energy question there was, and almost nobody was looking for a different answer. Here's what tends to happen when an industry finds something that works well enough. The people in charge stop asking whether something better exists. In American battery labs, questioning lithium was treated almost like questioning gravity. Nobody wanted to hear it. The money was flowing, the factories were humming, the cars were selling. Why disturb a good thing? That mindset set the stage for everything that followed. Because while American companies were busy perfecting lithium, someone else was quietly chasing a completely different idea, and that someone wasn't in America. The cracks in the lithium story were already visible. The fire risk was documented. The cold weather weakness was written up. The supply chain fragility was easy to see coming. But the profits were too good and the momentum too strong for anyone to want to rock the boat. So the industry kept going, and those cracks kept widening. To see how serious those cracks became, look at what happened when lithium batteries collided with the real world in ways nobody had planned for. You probably remember this story from 2016, even if the details are fuzzy. Samsung released a phone called the Galaxy Note 7. Reviewers called it the best phone yet made. People lined up to buy it. Then, within weeks, phones started catching fire on desks, in pockets, on airplanes mid-flight. In one particularly alarming case, a phone caught fire on a nightstand while its owner slept just a couple feet away. Samsung had to pull every unit off the market. Airlines around the world banned the device, and the total recall cost the company roughly $5 billion. One of the most expensive product disasters in tech history. Most people blamed Samsung for a bad phone. What got far less coverage is that the fire risk wasn't unique to that phone. It's baked into every lithium battery ever built. The liquid electrolyte that carries charge through a lithium cell is flammable. If a cell overheats, gets punctured, or charges too fast, it can genuinely catch fire, and worse. When one cell ignites, it heats the neighboring cell, which ignites and heats the next one, cascading through the whole pack faster than any cooling system can contain. Engineers call this thermal runaway. Everyone else just calls it a disaster. Then there's what cold weather does to lithium. Below freezing, the charged particles inside a lithium battery stop flowing smoothly and start plating onto the internal surfaces, like tiny metallic needles. Every charge cycle, those needles grow a bit larger, and if they get big enough, they can short the battery internally, generating heat and triggering the same fire risk described above. Even short of that, cold weather quietly eats into your range near freezing. A lithium battery can lose a significant chunk of its rated distance simply because the air got cold. Nothing mechanical failed. For someone driving an EV in Minnesota in January, that can mean over 100 miles of range gone on a morning when every mile counts. Every EV owner in a cold climate knows this. It comes up constantly in parking lots and online forums. It rarely shows up in the brochure, but winter reveals it every time. None of this was secret. Engineers had been documenting it for years, building better thermal management systems, writing smarter software, adding heaters inside the packs. None of it solved the underlying issue. Doesn't perform well in the cold, and no amount of engineering around the edges changes that basic chemistry. On top of that, between 2020 and 2022, lithium prices spiked roughly eightfold in 2 years, then crashed by about 70% in 2023 alone. The industry had built the future of clean energy on a raw material with the price stability of a roller coaster. American companies kept pushing forward with lithium anyway, but across the Pacific, someone had been paying close attention to those cracks and was about to act on them. Here's something most people don't know. Long before lithium became the star of the battery world, scientists in the 1960s were experimenting with a completely different element sitting just below lithium. On the periodic table, chemically similar in many ways, and vastly more abundant present throughout the ocean in huge quantities. You know it as part of table salt. The relevant part is sodium. The first high-capacity rechargeable battery wasn't lithium-based at all. It was sodium-based, built by Ford Motor Company in 1966. It worked impressively in the lab, but it had one enormous drawback. It had to operate at roughly 300 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. Nobody was putting something that hot under the hood of a family car. So the idea sat on a shelf, scientifically interesting but practically useless. Then, in 1972, chemist Stanley Whittingham figured out how to make a lithium battery function at ordinary room temperature. And that single breakthrough changed everything. Lithium leaped ahead and never looked back. By the time Sony began selling commercial lithium batteries in 1991, the race was effectively over. Over the following 3 decades, more than $1 trillion poured into lithium technology worldwide, while sodium sat shelved, not because anyone had proven it inferior, but because nobody wanted to spend the money to prove otherwise. Sodium had one problem that frustrated researchers for decades. Sodium atoms are about 35% larger than lithium atoms. Inside a battery, atoms need to slide in and out of a storage material repeatedly without damaging it. Lithium fits neatly between the layers of graphite, the same material found in pencil lead, and slides in and out almost indefinitely without wearing the structure down. Sodium atoms were simply too big. Every attempt to squeeze one into graphite cracked the layered structure apart. And after a few hundred cycles, the battery was finished. The energy potential was there, the underlying chemistry worked, but the storage material couldn't handle the size mismatch. That single problem stalled sodium battery research for 40 years, and American companies largely wrote it off. They had lithium working and profitable. Why risk billions on salt? Not everyone gave up on it, though. A small team in Canada made a discovery in the year 2000 that would eventually change the whole trajectory, though it made no headlines at the time, just a quiet finding in a quiet lab that would sit unnoticed for another 2 decades, waiting for a company willing to spend the money nobody in America wanted to spend. That company wasn't based in Detroit or Silicon Valley. It was in China, and it was about to attempt something the entire battery industry had written off as impossible. Back to that Canadian lab in 2000, the team was working with hard carbon, a material produced by heating plant waste and similar organic material to very high temperatures in sealed, oxygen-free containers. It sounds sophisticated, but what results looks nothing like the tidy, stacked layers of graphite in a pencil. Hard carbon is disordered, full of pockets and gaps of wildly varying sizes, scattered almost randomly, as if a box of carbon atoms had been shaken and frozen mid-air. It looks useless for anything precise, let alone a battery. But here's the twist. Those messy, irregular pockets happen to be roughly the right size to hold sodium atoms. Sodium can slide in and out of hard carbon thousands of times without damaging it, because there's no rigid structure to break the atoms. Simply settle into whatever pocket fits and slide back out when the battery discharges. The problem that had stumped the field's best researchers for 40 years suddenly had an answer, and that answer had been sitting in the lab the whole time. Not a new element, not a new theory, just a different form of carbon nobody had thought to pair with sodium until this team tried it. There was a catch, and a serious one. Hard carbon absorbs moisture almost like a sponge. The same disordered structure that makes it good at holding sodium also makes it grab water. And even a trace of moisture inside a battery reacts with the internal electrolyte to produce gas that destroys the cell from the inside out. In a lab, with small batches and careful handling, you can keep things dry enough. In a factory producing thousands of batteries a day for cars and power grids, that's an entirely different challenge. You can't guarantee every single unit comes out perfectly moisture-free at scale. The risk was too large, the cost of failure too high, and the investment needed to solve it exceeded what any university or small company could realistically fund. So for 2 decades, the discovery simply sat there. American labs published papers on it. Japanese companies ran small-scale tests. European universities applied for grants. Everyone agreed the science was promising. Nobody was willing to commit the billions of dollars needed to turn that promise into a real product. The potential was obvious to anyone reading the research, but potential doesn't build factories or put batteries into cars. What it took was a company with deep pockets willing to take the risk everyone else had passed on. American companies had the money. They chose not to spend it, sticking with the technology that already felt safe. One company in China looked at the same research, saw the same potential, and made a bet that would eventually leave the American battery industry scrambling to catch up. That company is CATL, Contemporary Amperex Technology Company Limited, headquartered in Fujian, China, and by a wide margin the largest battery maker on the planet. Stop people on the street in almost any American city and ask about CATL, and most would have no idea what you're talking about. Around 2015, CATL made a decision that looked reckless from the outside, committing roughly $1.5 billion over the following decade to solve the hard carbon moisture problem. While American battery companies poured money into scaling lithium and driving its costs down further, CATL poured money into something much of the world had dismissed. As a science fair curiosity, they then worked through the problems methodically, and the details that later emerged surprised a lot of people. Their first major fix was modifying the surface chemistry of the hard carbon so it repelled water instead of absorbing it, essentially giving the material a raincoat effect. Their second fix was controlling the size of the internal pockets with remarkable precision. Pockets too small couldn't hold enough sodium for good energy density. Pockets too large wasted space. And getting that size right consistently across millions of cells took years of dedicated engineering and money nobody else was willing to risk. The result is a battery CATL calls Nextra. What it delivers has surprised even people who've been following this story closely. In a production electric vehicle, Nextra provides over 310 miles of range on a single charge, with an 80% charge achievable in about 15 minutes. These aren't lab bench figures. This is a battery being manufactured at scale and shipped to real customers right now. Its lifespan is arguably even more striking. Nextra can withstand more than 10,000 full charge cycles before meaningful degradation sets in. Roughly 3 times the cycle life of the lithium batteries it competes against. Charge it once a day, and it would still be functioning after roughly 27 years. By the time it wears out, the car built around it will likely have been recycled more than once. Then there's cold weather performance. where sodium goes from impressive to genuinely embarrassing for lithium. The electrolyte inside Naxtra stays fluid down to about minus 58 degrees Celsius, colder than the lowest temperature ever recorded in mainland Alaska. At minus 40 Celsius, it still retains around 90% of its full charge, a temperature at which a comparable lithium battery, for anyone driving an EV in a cold climate, that's not a minor upgrade. It's the difference between a car that functions all winter and one that struggles for 4 months straight. And then there's price, which might be the most consequential number in the entire story. CATL is producing sodium cells for roughly $19 per kilowatt hour, compared to $55 to $70 per kilowatt hour for lithium cells. That's not a marginal gap. It's a battery costing roughly a third as much, being manufactured at full scale for real customers right now. This is the battery behind that 60 gigawatt-hour deal. And it's why American companies are now scrambling to understand exactly what just happened. Here's the honest, somewhat uncomfortable explanation for why America missed this. Lithium's problems were never a secret. They were published in research papers for decades. The fire risk was documented by 2005. The cold weather weakness was well understood by 2010. The supply chain fragility was visible by 2015. All of it was public and available to anyone who cared to look. But when a technology works well enough, and the profits keep coming, whole industries fall into a familiar trap. They stop searching for something better. Change requires a reason strong enough to outweigh the comfort of staying the course, and American battery companies had that reason sitting in plain view for 20 years. They chose comfort, the technology they already knew, the factories already built, the profits already flowing. Chinese battery companies read the same research, saw the same potential, and chose to spend the money and time required to turn it into something real. That harder path has now become the winning one. And America is playing catch-up in a technology it could have led from the beginning. Sodium batteries didn't appear out of nowhere. They sat in labs and journals for over 20 years, waiting for the moment the world would finally take them seriously. That moment arrived because lithium forced it. It got too expensive, too fire-prone, too dependent on a handful of countries for raw material. All of that pushed the industry to finally look at the alternative that had been sitting on the periodic table the whole time. For American automakers trying to build affordable EVs, this is a genuinely difficult development. Chinese electric vehicles built around sodium batteries can be priced well below what American companies can match using lithium, because the gap in raw material cost is simply too large to engineer around. For American power grids being built with billions in public funding, the news is just as tough. Those grids are being constructed with lithium batteries that Chinese manufacturers are already moving past storage systems. Going online, today we'll use cells that cost more, last less, and carry fire risks that sodium batteries largely avoid. The future of energy storage was sitting in a salt shaker the whole time. China found it first, funded the hard problems, and built the factories. America, for now, is in the position of a country that watched a new industrial shift begin and stayed home. Lithium's era isn't over. But for the first time in 30 years, the world has a real alternative, and it isn't controlled by American companies. That 60 gigawatt-hour deal in 2025 wasn't just a contract, it was a signal that the map of global energy just got redrawn. And the new center of gravity isn't where anyone in Detroit or Silicon Valley expected it to land.